Hi, my name's Keith Cooper of Northlight Images, and this is about black and white printing on this, the Epson ET-8550, although the general principles are applicable to other printers as well. The reason I'm having a look at this is that I recently created a whole load of profiles, ICC profiles, for a range of matte photo papers. The idea behind it was that you could, by choosing these, you could almost certainly find a profile which matched some third-party photo matte paper that you'd got hold of. I've got enough of a range of them, but anyway, I put a link obviously in the notes to that video as well. But somebody asked me about black and white, and I mentioned it during the video that yeah, I would almost certainly use the ABW print mode for printing black and white, and that you could linearize it. Now, what does linearizing mean? It means effectively get rid of clogged up blacks. So if you had an image and you printed it and the shadows came out too dark, crunched up, it could well be that you were not getting a linear response between the image data, the grayness of the image data, because we're just talking black and white, monochrome here. So it might not be that you're getting a linear relationship between the different tones that you were putting in from the picture to what was coming out the printer. And in particular, the problem is almost always the blacks tend to block up a bit. Now, I've got lots of stuff about this. If you go back to my original 8550 review, then I've got a whole section on black and white there. But I'm going to have a look at this in the specific context of the papers, of photo matte papers that I looked at. Because for those, for colour, with the profiles, most of the papers, you got distinctly better looking results. Oh, sometimes just a little bit better, but better looking results using the VFA media setting, not the Epson Matte media setting, which you would probably assume was the correct one to do. Now, that works for colour because remember, any non-linearity that's that the printer is exhibiting is being corrected to some extent by the profile. So you could use these profiles I've produced to print black and white, and they will probably give you fairly good results using black and white. But I've found that in general, if you can get it to work with the paper, the ABW black and white print mode, it's in the driver, or I've got an example here, I'm producing these test charts from Epson Print Layout, which despite what Epson US continues to say on their website, works perfectly well with the 8550. I get people saying, oh, but Epson says it doesn't work. Well, news to this printer, me and everybody else happily using it. Yep. Different divisions of Epson, and they can't be bothered to update the website. So, you know, don't believe everything you read on a manufacturer's website. Remember, it is created by a marketing department, and quite possibly a marketing department in just one part of the business. So, you know, with that out of the way, here I am happily using Epson Print Layout, which works just fine. I have a series of test images that I use for this, a black and white test image I've created over the years. Now, there are two versions of this that I'm printing here. What I'm talking about in this video, and this is it'll be a pair of videos, is the process that I go through when I'm testing a printer to check it. Now, I use this particular target here. This target has a special section along the top here, just this one little section, which is a 51-step wedge from paper white to black as can be with the particular paper. And I read these using an ICIS spectrophotometer. This is an A3 ICIS spectrophotometer, and this one works well. It's actually bigger than the A3 because this one can comfortably read in A3 plus sheets, 13-inch by 19-inch sheets. This is what I use for making the profiles along with the i1 Profiler software. However, to replace this and the software, if it disappeared, I would need nearly £5,000 current prices. So I do not expect many people to actually have access to this kit. However, the results I get from it are very useful for deciding, and this is what the second video will be about, how to use something like the scanner on this, the Epson 8550, to do a broadly similar thing to what I'm going to do with this. Now, think of this, what I'm showing here, as the really detailed version. This is the why I do it, and why I put and how I do it here with this particular kit. But I have got another version of the target, and I've got several versions of this test image, and this one has a 21-step wedge on the top, and this bit is fine for scanning and using that. Now, I wrote a detailed article which I'll put a link to in the notes, which if you want to shortcut the process of waiting for the next video, you can have a look at, which goes through making use of a scan of this test image. The only bit you need to scan is this target here, and it involves opening it up. Now I use in the example there because it was in 2020, just before I started making videos, which is why it's not covered in a video. I'm looking at scanning this, opening the image up in Photoshop. Now I use Photoshop for this. You could use Affinity Photo. Lightroom, nah, probably not a hope for stuff like this. This is, you know, you need a proper image editor. Oops, did I say that about Lightroom? Yes, I did. Anyway, you need to measure this, and there are probably other tools you can use for doing it, and extract the data that I'm getting from all this expensive kit and software you can get just from using the scanner here. Now, I'll look at the practical aspects of using the scanner here for that, because the scanner obviously is nowhere near as precise as this and gives out different type of data. That's why this is a 51-step grayscale that I'm using for the readings here, and this one is 21. In case you think, oh, well, I could use the 51-step and get a more accurate version. You could, but that's assuming that the scanner here is accurate enough in its measuring abilities. I'm going to say maybe not, and if I was using just this, I would only use this 21-step wedge. In fact, you probably don't even need this many, but 21 steps is a good number that gives you 5% steps between the levels and is easy to use. But anyway, that's for next time. Here are the images here that I've printed. Now I've printed them using high quality, so unidirectional printing. I've printed them both from the Epson print layout software, and each one I've just used the default ABW settings. Now the ABW settings, there are loads of them, particularly if you look at the advanced settings. You'll see all sorts of things. Now, I will come back to a particular use for the tint setting there in a bit, but that's not important for this basic process, but it does help you possibly get better looking pictures on some papers. But anyway, these are read using I1 Profiler. Now, if you have a spectrophotometer, there are versions of this. Say, I'll put the links to the articles that cover all the detail, but there are versions of this step wedge related to this one here that you can use with things like a spider print device, or you can use it with this. In fact, you can run I1 Profiler in demo mode and it will do this form of target recognition. And it will work with an ordinary spectrophotometer. Now, if you're interested in that, follow up the links in the articles, because some of them are quite complex, but once you know what you're doing, it's relatively easy to do. But I'm not going to cover any of that. If you want to know that, read the articles. And it always goes for any of my stuff. If I've written an article, the article will have been updated and probably more current. I do adjust and alter the articles over time. The videos I can't change once they're produced and uploaded, so you're stuck with it. But anyway, I read this, I read these steps, I run it through QuadToneRIP software. Now the QuadToneRIP software is an excellent print software for lots of Epson printers. It's very good for that. If you're interested in that, follow the links in it and have a look at it. If you get the software and use it and download it and want to use it for printing, make sure a donation for it. It was shareware. I don't know if it still is, but anyway, it is well worth it. If you're interested in more advanced black and white, have a look at QuadToneRIP. I'm just using a function of it here to take the measurement data from here. Ignore whatever format it's in. It's saved from here. It's in the article, as you probably guessed. Take that measurement data, drop it into the profile creator that's in one of the tools that comes with QuadToneRIP, and it generates data. And this is the important bit. I have generated a curve based on this data here. Now, the information I'm looking at is in the line of L's. That's the luminance, or just the tone of this, how dark it is, the density. And there are density measurements by the side, so you can actually see what the Dmax of the paper is. Both of these come out around about 1.7. But because I've measured this both using UV in the measurement and without UV in the measurement, the optical brighteners in this make quite a considerable difference. So if I take a basic curve here, this is measured from, this is using the VFA setting. The line of L's we can see runs across and then sort of drops off. That shows, and I can see it from here, the shadows really are quite crunched up with this. So we've got, using the VFA setting, we've got a good quality image, but the blacks are crunched up. If I look at the results from using the Epson Matte, I can see a relatively straight line. In fact, straight enough that I would regard it as usable as is. So, using this paper with ABW, if I use the Epson Matte mode, then that's the Epson Matte media setting. If I use that, it works straight off. If I use the VFA, and remember the VFA worked better with a profile, if for colour, maybe black and white, I didn't test black and white printing with my profiles, but it should work okay with those. But if I use that with this, instantly I can see that I'm going to get a problem. So any blacks beyond about 85% are going to need a bit of alteration. I need to lighten up the blacks. Now, you can do this with a simple curve adjustment. Now, curve adjustments easy enough to do in Photoshop, or the printer drivers here don't, the Epson print layout doesn't give you this option. On Canon PPL software, you do get an option to add a curve into it. I'd be very wary about adding curves because there's no way easily of replicating this. You can load and save curves on that, but if you're looking at this because you've got a Canon printer, Pro 200, 300, Pro 1000, 1100 and upwards, all of those, this works on those as well, but you do have a few more options in the black and white print mode. In general, they are similar to this, but you do have a few more options for adjusting things. So you could make a curve, adjust it. But I think, wow, okay, from looking at this, well, the Epson Matte picture just looks better. I can see, yeah, I can see the crunched up blacks in it. If I just have a look at the version of the data made without using UV, I can see the actual shape of the curve. The L's is not much difference, but the others, the other letters here, the A and B, so that's the LAB colour information, is still pushed over. And that shows me, and I can see it even in this lighting here, which is optimized for video use, even in this, these prints look very cold. They look decidedly blue-green tinge to them. And I can see that from this data here. If I go back to the UV version, I'm seeing the contribution of the optical brightener in the paper. This is a very bright white paper. Printing black and white on this that's going to look good is going to be quite dependent on the lighting you're using to do it. So that's, say, with the UV cut out of it, the data is a bit easier to read, and I can see that I do need an adjustment. And so I'll come back to that. That's where this the adjustments in ABW can help you here. But that's with the VFA. If I look at the Epson Matte setting, I can still see we have that general color tone. It's there still. It's there in the UV data, swamped in the lighter areas by the brightness of this. So that means that, you know, it doesn't matter whether I use VFA or in Epson Matte setting, I'm going to have issues with the color of this. So that is how I will do the testing of a particular paper, and I do this sort of testing for every one of the major reviews I do. So have a look, as I say, at the original review for the 8550 here. It's got quite an extensive black and white section, including a bit more about these curves and the likes. So how do I correct the VFA one if I want to use it? Well, if I look at the density, I can see that the density here is 1.76. That's the D max for it with the Epson Matte. And if I look at the VFA, the density is actually slightly less. It's 1.7. Now, much as I said in the article looking at the video looking at making the profiles for these and ignoring boundary conditions, Dmax numbers are a very poor indicator of print quality. In this particular instance, it does suggest that, okay, I'm using the matte black here, but for this particular paper, I might the Epson Matte media setting might be a better choice. If I'm printing colour and using ICC profiles, the ICC profile, the image printed on this one here, the VFA, definitely looked better. This one looked very different. So just because your colour printing looks better with one setting doesn't necessarily mean that your black and white will. Now, I mentioned the colour tints here. From this graph here, and this is just produced by saving the data here, if you want to do this with measurement from this, using this scanner, it's a little bit more involved. You have to have a look at the data and things, but this one just falls out of it because of the graph here. Now, looking at this, I can see that both the A and B channels of the colour are both off-center, suggesting that there is colour tint. And what I would use for this is I would adjust that little colour adjuster, the actual thing here. I'm using the standard settings, so despite the fact it says darker the tone, that is the default. I always go for the defaults for these. You can adjust them if you want to experiment. And obviously, this being an ink tank printer, it's relatively easy to experiment. But in general, I found leave those settings alone. You might have a look at changing the shadow tonality. That's one way you can adjust that a little bit, but that might correct these shadows a bit. As I would use a curve, although actually looking at this data, I would use the Epson Matte setting for black and white. But looking here at this, I can do a slight color adjustment. This tells me I need to make the image slightly more magenta to offset this particular tone here. And what I would do is use this. Now, this only allows you to do sort of XY adjustments, whereas the actual adjustment is a diagonal adjustment on the little diagram there. So I would say an adjustment of 3 on each axis, just to take the center point down slightly towards the magenta, and then do a test print and have a look at it. Now, this is one area where the Canon software that does this does score an advantage, in that it gives you an option of doing a sheet of variations. So you can say, okay, here's the black and white, I'd like you to do variations, and then you can do that and step through it and find which has the best looking black and white. That's relatively easy to do, but printing it is easy. Actually deciding which colour looks best on a whole series of adjustments is quite tricky. It's one of the ones where you can print a whole series of pictures on it, and it's worthwhile having a sheet of paper, cutting a hole out of it so you only look at one at a time just to measure them, so you're not unduly influenced by all the other settings. But for this, what we've got is ABW. Yes, it works. ABW needs linearizing for the VFA setting. It would work fine with it. Maybe reasons for on other papers it could be different. I've just picked this one paper. This is the Olmec Photo Matte Archival 230 gram. This was one of the ones that worked very well, but also showed some differences between the two. So what we've got here, simple adjustments. It's even simpler, although less precise, if you use this, and that's what I'll cover in the next video. If you've got any questions, please do let me know. All my profiles, that's the proper ICC profiles, are available on request. All I ask for them is a coffee donation towards them. And there are now over 40 odd. I don't know if I've hit 50 yet, but there are a lot of profiles. In particular, the ones made for this paper, these papers here, that's the Photo Matte, should be adaptable to almost any paper that you can find that is called Photo Matte. It's a generic term. The ones I've tested range from 120 GSM up to nearly 300 GSM, so it should cover quite a range of things. But there you have it. This is the techie, expensive version of how to do it. So when I come back, I'll have a look at the somewhat easier system using just the scanner here. Thanks for watching. Hope that was of interest. Bye.